Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Veguilla-Lezan, a freelance graphic designer, illustrator, and educator based out of the Midwest, and I run Bella and Sophia Creative Studio. On this channel, you'll get a behind-the-scenes view of the work that I do as a creative freelancer and find a huge library of free tutorials catered to those of you interested in graphic design, surface pattern design, programs like Affinity and Procreate, as well as art and illustration. If you want to learn more about me, you can find me online at bellasophiacreative.com. So in today's tutorial, I'm excited to share a new surface pattern design project. I've often shared how to create different types of seamless pattern repeats in Affinity Designer, and specifically how to make half drops. But this time around, I'll be sharing how to create a half drop repeat in Affinity Photo. In Photo, we have to do things just a bit different since it's a raster-based program, but the process still can be done. If you create surface pattern designs that have a hand-drawn feel using raster brushes, this is a great technique for you to use. Let's get started and create something great together. So before we jump into the mechanics and building out our half drop, let's learn more about why half drops are important. So half drop repeats are a variation of the basic repeat pattern and can provide three really key benefits in surface pattern design. The first being concealment. Half drop repeats can make it harder to see where the repeat begins and ends. Essentially, it hides it, especially if the design has different elements and textures. This can be really useful when you want to create a seamless, organic look or when you don't want the repeat to be really obvious. The second benefit is flow. Half drop repeats can create a smooth flow across the pattern. It helps to avoid abrupt transitions or noticeable lines throughout the design. And the last benefit is suitability. So half drop repeats can work really well for designs that mimic nature's randomness and variation. So things like florals or botanical patterns are great to use this repeat style with. So now that we understand the benefits of a half drop, let's jump into the mechanics in creating our half drop repeat together. Okay, so we are going to start with our half drop repeat in Affinity Photo by just setting up a basic file. So we're going to go into Affinity Photo 2. Once you launch it, you're going to get this basic kind of like launch area, launch screen, and then we're going to go into our file options. We're going to select new, and we're going to set up a new file. So we're going to go and create a custom document. So what we'll want to do is update our page width and our height to 2000 pixels. You may have to change the document units from whatever it currently is to pixels. And then we'll go into our page width and type in 2000 pixels and our height 2000 pixels as well. We're going to keep this at a 300 DPI. You can adjust based on whatever your print on demand website requires or whatever your printer requires. I'm just going to keep it at a higher DPI, which will mean a higher file size, but essentially it'll ensure that if we print it out, we'll get the crispest, highest quality print that we can. Also, we'll want to make sure if you have a white background, currently we'll want to make sure we go into our color options and switch it to a transparent background. We can always add a color background into our file, but I just find it's easier to use a transparency in the off chance that we want to just create our repeat and then place it on a different color block. And then you can change your color format again based on whatever your printing needs are. Since we're just going to be working on this for web, RGB works fine, but if you do work with a traditional manufacturer or printer, you may need to switch it out to CMYK. Just make sure to tap into whoever you're working with in terms of printing services to ensure that they can confirm what kind of color format you need. Everything else can stay the same, and then I'm just going to tap on Create to set up the new file. So once we are in this document, what we'll want to do is pull in some motifs to start to create our pattern. We want to make sure that we're cognizant that whatever we put into our artboard here does not go off the sides at all, because we're going to need to create that offset in order to start to actually create the repeating pattern, and we have to do that using our Affinity filters. So we don't want to have any issues if we accidentally nudge an actual visual off the edges when we're first building this out. All right, so before we actually create our half drop pattern, I want to explain how this concept works. So I currently have a pattern here that is already in half drop format. I'm going to resize it so I can explain the mechanics behind a half drop. It's currently at 2000 by 2000, so I want to size this down to half. I'm going to go into our transform tools on the right hand side. Mines are all the way at the bottom here in the lower right. If you don't see these on your screen, what you can just do is go into your upper menu select window, and then you can scroll down to transform and make sure it's checkmarked, and then you'll be able to access these. So I'm going to go into my width and height, and I'm just going to change this from 2000 to 1000. And then I'm going to hit tab and go into the height and change that to 1000 because we have a perfect square and we want to make sure it stays that way. All right, so I'm going to make a few copies of these by selecting Command C and then hitting Command V to paste it, or you can go into Edit and select Copy and then Paste. So with a half drop, what you'll find is I'm going to select my black arrow tool so I can drag this top pattern tile down. I'm going to hold shift so it stays in a straight line. And also I have magnetics turned on, which is why you see these red and green like crosshairs. So if you go into your upper menu, you'll see something that looks like a magnet. So you'll want to tap on it. If it looks like it's a light gray, it's turned off. But if you click on it and turns like a dark gray, you'll know it's turned on. So I'm going to hold shift and drag this first one down. With a half drop, your top and bottom of your tiles connect. But what ends up happening is that your left and right, as opposed to a traditional repeat, where if you just drag your tiles to the right or left, they connect on the sides. With a half drop, what ends up happening is that you pull your repeat off to the side, and then you're going to bring it down by half the measure of the actual tile itself. So it would go down 500 because that's half of the 1000 pixels that the original square is. And then once you do that, you'll see that it matches up. So I'm going to show that again. So if I take this tile, this copy tile that I've created, I'm going to hold shift, I'm going to bring it to the right. It's not going to match up, but what ends up happening is that because it's going down by half a drop, so half the size of your original tile, I'm going to bring it up half and it'll match up with that upper section. And that's essentially how this is created. So I'm going to add some, after I fill this last section, I'm going to add some lines so we can better see how this works. So I'm going to go and get my pen tool. I'm just going to tap, hold shift, and then tap on the other side. And then I'm going to increase the stroke and return the color to something that's easily visible. I think I'm going to use like a blue, just to make it easier to see. And then I'm going to increase the size of this just so that we can see how this works. All right, so I'm going to take this line and I'm going to match it up to the center, and then I'm going to make a copy of it, and then I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to hold shift and rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. And then I'm going to copy that horizontal line again so we can kind of see where all of these sections match up. And then I'm going to resize my lines just so that you can see where the actual original tiles are now. We have 5 tiles total. The original tile is in the upper left here, and then we made a copy of it and we dragged it down because our top and bottom match. And then we made another copy and we pulled it to the right, and then we dropped it by half the size of the tile, and that's this main tile here. And then we made 2 additional copies to finish the repeat, and we pulled it to the right again, and then we pulled it up, and that's this half tile here. And then we did the same thing with that final tile, made a copy, we pulled it to the right, and then we dragged it down by half a step, and that's this bottom section to complete the tile. So this is essentially how the mechanics of a half drop repeat work. So we can create these in Affinity Photo using the affine function, but it requires a few more steps. It's not too complicated, but there are just some extra steps that we need in order to make it work. And I have some already created motifs that I've been working on. Is just copy and paste some of these into my project here and then start building out the tile. So I'm going to take this lantern, I'm going to paste it in, but what I want to do is group these layers because I have the line work and the coloring on separate layers. So after I've pasted it in, you'll see in our layer studio here on the right hand side, there are 2 layers. So I'm going to right click these and I'm going to select group. You could also merge them if you want. I just find that sometimes grouping them, if you want to go back and edit things, makes it easier. And then I'm going to take 2 more pieces. I'm going to take the koi fish and I'm going to take one of the flowers. I'm going to paste these in. I'm going to resize this just a bit so we have a variety of sizing to work with here. I think I want the koi bigger than the lantern though. And then I'm going to go in and grab this flower here, the red one. I'm going to copy them by hitting Command C or going into Edit, selecting copy, and then going back into my new file and then hitting Command V or going into Edit and selecting paste. So I want to give myself a variety in terms of like shapes and sizes, and then I'm going to copy this a few times, and then same with the fish and same with the lantern. So what I'm going to do is start to build out the center of my repeat here. And what we want to keep in mind is that we don't want any of these images to essentially go over any of the edges, because we're going to need to work with the edges when we start to create the repeat using the affine function, which is essentially offsetting. And the idea here is almost like fitting these in together like a puzzle and seeing how each of these elements can work together to fill up the space. They can overlap if you need to, or you can keep them in their own space as well on your artboard. Once we have everything placed on our artboard as we like, we can go into our left-hand toolbar, select the black arrow tool. We're going to select everything on the artboard, and I'm going to right-click the layers, and I'm going to select group. That way I kind of have everything together. That way I can have everything together and ensure it's exactly where I'd like it on the artboard. I can select everything with my black arrow tool, move it around just a bit, kind of make sure everything is centered, and then go into my layer studio, right-click it, and then select group, and it will group everything together. This is going to be our editable group, so if we ever have to go back and edit something, revise something, we can do so. So I'm going to go into that layer group, double click where it says group, and I'm going to rename it to editable motifs. And then what I want to do is make a copy of this. I'm going to right click it, I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to select duplicate. And then this duplicated version is going to be what we're going to use to offset our tile. So I'm going to go into the editable motifs. I'm going to turn it off by tapping on that little round circle on the right hand side of the layer, and it will allow us to toggle the visibility on or off. So I'm going to toggle it off, and I'm going to go to the top layer group here. I'm going to rename this original block because it's not quite our tile yet, but it's our block of motifs that we're going to use to create the tile. So what I want to do is right click this and select merge visible, and it's going to turn this into a pixel. So I'm going to turn off that original block, and then I'm going to tap on my pixel here, and it has created a flattened version of all of our motifs that we can now offset. So we're going to go into our filters options, making sure that that pixel tile is selected, and then we're going to go into filters, and we're going to select distort, and then we're going to scroll down to affine. So once we're in affine, we'll get this pop up, which will give us all of our options. You can scale X and Y, you can rotate, and then what we need to focus on is offsetting. So we're going to offset both our X and Y plane by 50%. So we're just dividing our square in half. We don't even have to do the math. It's really helpful with Affinity. You just have to work in percentages. So we're going to offset our X by 50%, and we're going to offset our Y by 50%. And then what we want to do is make sure that our extend mode is selected to wrap, and then we're going to hit apply. And what that does is that it brings all of our motifs into the corners. Since we're creating a half drop, what we need to do is adjust our right and our left options. So we know the top and bottom should match. When we move our tile to the left or right, it's going to move over and then it's going to move down by half. So to do that, we want to make sure we turn on our snapping tool, and we're going to select this corner. So what we want to do is go to our selection tools on the left hand side, and we want to scroll down to our lasso tool. It looks like a lasso. It's right underneath the magic wand tool. Select it and hold so we get the additional pop-up options, and we want to just select rectangular marquee tool because it'll make it easier to select our corners and make sure that our selection is just the area that we want. So we're going to select our upper right quadrant. We want to make sure that we are selecting exactly that quadrant. So if we're dividing 2000 by 2000 into 4, this is going to be 1000 by 1000 pixels. The second quadrant is going to be 1000 by 1000, and so on and so forth. What we can do to make that a little bit easier is turn on our guides. We're going to go into our view options in our main menu. I'm going to scroll down to guides, and then what we want to do is update our column guides by to be 2 and our row guides to be 2, and we're going to change the color just a purple color just so that it's easy to see. Once I've done that, then we can go into our horizontal and vertical guides, and you have to select this little plus icon. It'll add a new horizontal guide for us, and then it'll add another vertical guide for us, and then we'll see that on our screen. So once I've done that, I can hit close, and then making sure magnetics is turned on, I can then select the upper right hand quadrant using my marquee tool so that it snaps exactly to what I need it to be. And then I'm going to select edit, cut, edit, paste. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the lower right hand quadrant, making sure I go back to my original flattened pixel layer. I'm going to make sure I have my marquee selection tool clicked on. I'm going to pull in that rectangle marquee selection so that it fills that lower right quadrant, and it should snap into place. I'm going to let go. I'm going to select edit, cut, edit, paste. All right, so now what we're going to do is deselect everything. So I'm going to go into select, deselect, or you can just click outside of your artboard. I'm going to select my lower right quadrant and move it up to my upper right quadrant and basically just swap places. And I want to make sure magnetics is still turned on so that I can move it exactly into the exact same spot as the elements above it. Now I'm going to go and select my upper right quadrant, hold shift and drag it down to my lower left quadrant. And we want to make sure we align them perfectly to the outer edge and perfectly with the image above. And you can kind of just like zoom in to make sure we don't have any issues. So what I'll do is go into my guides. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go into view, go into guides, and then I'm just going to select the vertical guide and trash it, and the horizontal guide and trash it, and then hit close. So that way I can kind of zoom in and make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. So sometimes you might get like, it looks like you have a hairline like offset. You might see like a little white line like this when I zoom out, but once you zoom in, and if you don't see it once you're zoomed in, you know you are in the right place. And sometimes it's just like it's a tech issue, it's like a bug. But I find that if I zoom in to double check, I usually actually don't have my motifs off. They're actually right where they need to be. It's just, again, like a technical bug that sometimes happens in the program. All right, so that creates our half drop, and then what we can do is begin to fill the rest of this space. So what I will opt to do is fill the rest of the space with the flowers, but you could also add in another fish if you wanted. Again, you have those editable motifs. You can just go in, select one, copy it, and it's okay if things are overlapping and whatnot. If you want to just make sure you fill that space in a way that makes sense. Once I'm finished filling in the rest of the tile, I kind of wanted to make this feel a little bit more maximalist in terms of trying to fill every single space possible, but you could also opt to keep it a little bit more minimal and just focus on the fish and the lanterns, and then keep the flowers a little bit more sparse. But I kind of just wanted to fill up space to see what things look like. So now that I've done that, what we can do is group everything together and save this file, and then export our tile. So I'm going to select all of the currently visible layers. I'm going to select that first in the bottom row here that is visible, and then I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to select the last one in the top here of in the top section of my layers, and then I'm going to just right click, I'm going to select group, and then I'm going to rename this group by double clicking where it says group and update this. And then I'm going to go into my file system, select file, save as, and then I'm going to navigate to my surface pattern design folders. I'm going to rename this file to lanterns, and I'm just going to save it in my design files for now, and then hit save. And then I'm going to export this final tile as is so that we can test it. So I'm going to select file, and then I'm going to select export, and we want to export this as a PNG because that will maintain its transparency, and then we'll keep it at the current size that it is, whole document, and then I'm going to select export, and then I'm going to change this from lanterns to lanterns tile, and then I'm going to set up a new file so we can test this out. So I know that this tile is 2000 by 2000, so I'm just going to set up a 4000 by 4000 tile. So I'm going to set file, new, and then I'm going to update this to 4000 by 4000. I'm going to keep everything else the same. You can opt to have a plain regular background, or you can keep it transparent. I'm just going to uncheck the transparency so it's easier for us to see what we're working with. And then I'm going to select create, and then I'm going to place my tile. Typically I would utilize the fill pattern. The problem is when you fill your pattern, typically it will create a pattern that has a straight repeat, and there's no offset option in terms of how your pattern is set. So you have to do the offset by hand in Affinity Photo when you're testing it. When you upload it to something like Spoonflower, you can opt to check mark offset, and it'll ensure that your tile works properly on the fabric using those specific settings. So I'm going to select file, place, I'm going to find my tile, I'm going to select open, and then I'm just going to tap onto my artboard so that it places the tile in. I'm going to make sure I have magnetics turned on so that everything kind of like snaps into place, and then I'm just going to pull this first tile to the upper left hand quadrant, and then I'm going to make a few copies, 5 or 6 of them, and then I'm going to start moving things into place to test them out to make sure this is indeed a seamless repeat. And you'll see all of your guides pop up so we know everything is in place because we have magnetics turned on. I'm going to go back to the next copy. I'm going to hold shift, drag it to the right, and then drag it up, and then select the last tile, drag it to the right, and then drag it all the way down to that lower left quadrant, and then everything matches up. And that is it. That is our final file. We can go in if we wanted and add a color to our background. This tester as is also a seamless repeat because we've basically put everything into place, and it should match up at the top and bottom, and it'll be a half drop on the right and left hand sides. And we can update the color to see what that does in terms of changing the overall look and feel of our pattern. We can just save this. We can go back to this tile and add that background if we wanted to. but I like the idea of kind of experimenting, seeing what things look like first, and then going back in and finalizing. And to do that, again, just go into our rectangle tool and then making sure your edges match up, going into your color options, removing your outline, going into your fill here in your swatches tool, and then updating the color and dragging that rectangle to the very bottom of our final tile. Again, save as, save, and then file, export, and then lanterns, final tile, hit save, and then this would be the file that you would upload to something like Spoonflower. Thank you so much for creating with me today. I hope this tutorial helped you get comfortable with Affinity Photo version 2, learn more about half-drop repeats, and gain the confidence that you need to design these complex patterns. I also hope that the tutorial has inspired you to experiment with different pattern styles that you create and help diversify your portfolio. Remember, you can find me online at bellasophiacreative.com and on socials at bellasophiacreative. If you like videos like this, please definitely consider giving this video a thumbs up, and also please consider subscribing to my channel so you can stay up to date on all of my videos. Thanks so much for creating with me today. I will see you in the next one. Bye.